Hello, listeners. You are listening to Musical Headwaters, a podcast where we ask composers about their creative process, their sources of inspiration, and essentially what makes them tick. I'm your host, DaiAne, and this is a podcast from the Contemporary Art Music Project Camp team. Today on the podcast, we have composer Benjamin D. Whiting. Ben is a composer, an educator, a developer, as well as an innovator. He is currently serving as the postdoctoral instructor of electronic music at the University of Chicago. He is a composer of electroacoustic music as well as acoustic works. His works are frequently performed in festivals worldwide, and he has also given numerous talks in these festivals. He is also a co-founder and co-executive director of Null-state Inc., an organization that paves the way for innovative growth of electronic and electroacoustic music. Ben, I've known since, I don't know. How long have we known each other, Ben?
We've known each other since 2018.
2018, yeah. And it was through a mutual friend of ours, a great friend of yours as well, Melody Chua, who you have a organization together with called Null-state. And yeah, so that's how we got to know each other. Where are you coming from, Ben?
So today I'm hailing from Chicago, Illinois. In fact, we're in the middle of this wicked winter storm where we already have about a foot of snow accumulated. So, and it's looking like it's only going to get worse overnight. So yeah, I'm nice and toasty in my Hyde Park apartment.
Nice. Yeah, the Chicago weather. I kind of miss it though, that ferocious wind.
That's right. You went to a Northwestern.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in another life.
You're well acquainted with Lake Michigan and all the lake effect snow and
yeah, for sure.
The wind and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you liking it in Chicago?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I'm here for a year on a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Chicago, and I'm just taking charge of the Chime Studio. I'm organizing Chime Fest 2022. We actually had to postpone it because of the Omicron spike, but seems like it's on for June. So so we're busy preparing for that, and of course teaching and composing.
Nice. So will your works be presented in the Chimes Festival in Chicago?
Yeah, so in fact, Melody will be coming over with our sensor augmented flute, the Chaos Flute, and she's going to be playing a piece of mine that's was in fact premiered in 2018, Human Sequencer. And she'll also be performing a brand new piece for the Chaos Flute that I wrote called V.
Nice. Yeah, so for our listeners, Melody Chua is our mutual friend, whom Ben also has an organization with called Null-state, and that's how I actually got to know you and your work as well, from hearing Melody perform with Chaos Flute. And would you like to tell us a little bit about Chaos Flute? It's a very innovative project and endeavor that you guys have been doing for years now, I assume.
It's hard to believe, but yeah, it's been over half a decade.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so the Chaos Flute is a project that that both Melody and I began during the spring semester of 2016. It was both of our last semesters at the University of Illinois. I was still ABD at the time, but I was just working on finishing up my dissertation, and Melody was finishing her dual bachelor degrees. We'd already collaborated on some projects in the past, and so we thought it would be just due to me beginning my journey into programming in SuperCollider, which is a programming language that's geared toward algorithmic music composition and even more importantly, digital signal processing and synthesis. And Melody being a tremendous flautist and also with some programming and electronics chops of her own, we decided to start working on this set of sensor augmentations for the Chaos Flute. It was kind of this project. It was, if you had seen the initial prototype where we had like piezoelectric transducers just literally velcroed to her flute, and we had we didn't even have motion sensors at that point. It was just really, we just had the piezos and like a lavalier mic just being fed into Super Collider, and then running processes that I had programmed for the very first pieces I wrote for our instrument. In fact, both Melody and I started this habit so that every time we had like this new iteration of our instrument, or really our sensor augmentation of it, we would test out the capabilities, or like the new capabilities we would introduce, by writing pieces for it. And the augmentations themselves went from, like I was saying, just piezoelectric transducers to a 9-axis motion sensor with airflow sensor, this key switchboard that Melody worked really hard on making it ergonomically designed, so a flautist can easily hit a button or toggle a toggle switch. And it's very small. It's battery powered too. The earliest versions were wired, but now it's powered by a battery, uses Bluetooth to connect to a computer, and it just attaches to any orchestral standard flute, or a C flute, if you will. And that's just, it's been a project that's been a labor of love. Granted, Melody has been working really hard on she's in charge of the hardware side of things, and yeah, thanks to her that we've been able to really refine the instrument. And at some point, in fact, it's been our plan to release it under an open source license, so that, I mean, we would build Chaos flutes to order, but also people would be able to like download the software that powers it, which is my role in the project, and then could grab the schematics and the files needed to, like, if they wanted to 3D print the attachment, and they can essentially build their own, because at the end of the day, our goal is to democratize electronics in music and allow as many people as possible who want to experiment with adding electronics into their compositional, improvisational workflow that opportunity.
It's incredible. um, and would this eventually, I know because it's been on the flute, and are you also thinking about eventually expanding it for other instruments as well, with the same concept, same ideas, and perhaps making something that's applicable on other instruments?
Yeah, it's a question that we actually get asked a lot. If I had a
Yeah.
nickel for every time I asked, will there ever be a chaos saxophone? And
Yeah.
the answer is, excuse me. I mean, I never want to say, never, but it's really
Right.
not on the horizon for us right now. I feel like,
Yeah.
with Melody in the middle of her PhD studies, and with me, like, just like really focusing also on my academic career, that we're taking our time with it, and both of us are also kind of branching out into different kinds of experimentation and interests. So I have a feeling that the Chaos Flute, at least for now, will be the only application. But who knows? We might change our mind within a year.
Right. Right. Well, I'm wondering, did you always start with electronic music, or did you ever stem from kind of more, let's say, basic or simple forms of composition, like acoustic writing, and then perhaps added on the electroacoustic part later on?
Are you speaking specifically of pieces I write for instrument and electronics, or do you mean just in my compositional output in general?
Um, in general, like from the beginning of your composition life,
Oh,
were there
at the
acoustic
beginning of
writing?
my, yeah, in fact, for I would say it's still the majority of my compositional career, so to speak, that I've been exclusively an acoustic composer. It wasn't until my doctoral studies at the University of Illinois that I really started getting into electronic music composition. And then it just took off. Um, but what really attracted me to electronic music and just the all of the possibilities that it entails, and just the method of composition itself, I think really just stems from my childhood. When I was very young, my parents couldn't help but notice that for some odd reason, I was 2 years old, and my favorite toy in the whole world was a four function calculator. Like, they would just give me a calculator on like a long road trip, and I would not cry or scream or ask, "Are we there yet?" or anything like that. I would just be
Wow.
mesmerized by it. And then from there, I developed an ability to just be able to do any kind of math in my head. I don't really have that ability to the same degree anymore, but I think just my toddler mind it was easier to pick up on patterns. So my father,
Uh-huh.
who has a significant interest in mathematics himself, thought it was a prime opportunity to latch onto it. So from like the age of 6, he was drilling me in algebra. He gave me his calculus textbooks from his university
Oh,
days, and he started me on computer programming. And so I was actually writing computer
wow.
programs when I was 6 years old. I mean, I started in
That's
BASIC and then
intense.
moved to assembly, um, but yeah, I mean, now granted, my programming kind of fell by the wayside when I started getting into music, but then I got into the University of Illinois, and with the electronic music curriculum there, which involves also computer programming, it just clicked for me. It to me, that was like I could finally merge like the love of my childhood with like the love of my teenage and adult years. So, and from there, I just started composing electronic music, but I still compose like thoroughly acoustic music too. Maybe not as often anymore, but I still do write in that idiom.
Yeah, so it became like a combination of two big interests of yours, music and I guess computer programming.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Yeah.
computer program. I mean, not all of my electronic music deals with programming, but
Hmm.
certainly I would say all of my recent efforts have involved computer programming, at least to some degree.
Is your father also a computer programmer?
He is, although he shifted from programming in his earlier years to networking. His real passion is actually getting computers to talk to each other, and
Wow.
he's been very successful at it too. So yeah, he when he was programming, oddly, he was a pilot in the Air Force at the time, and that's how he was able to get some significant promotions. He was writing new software that would handle like flight plans and the like that the military adopted. And they're like, "Hey, would you like a significant bump in rank and salary?" And of course, he would take it. But then he
Wow.
left the military when he was still pretty young. Was he even 40 yet? But yeah, so he retired from the military and then just devoted his efforts to first computer programming to some degree, but really computer networking, and that's just something that he just absolutely adores.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, for someone who has very little knowledge in regards to computer programming, it's very fascinating to hear that you had that since you were a little kid and also that it was taught to you from 6 years old on. That's incredible to me. So for you, it's a very natural language and a very comfortable environment to be in.
Yeah, in fact, it's probably one of the reasons why I actually take to text-based languages more than visual languages. For those who may be listening and who do compose electroacoustic music, they may be quite comfortable in using something like Pure Data or Max, which uses like a graphical interface, and you basically like construct the signal flow between objects, and it's supposed to be more intuitive. But for me, it was always actually more of a stumbling block because I'm not very much a visual person. I mean, I love visual art, but as far as like actually thinking things out visually, I don't typically do that. But being able to talk to a computer using text and using words, like using human-like language, was always feels very natural to me. And yeah, I think that's in large part due to the fact that I've been doing that for almost all my life.
Right. Yeah. And it's a language you speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That I do.
Uh, Speaking of which, that brings me to the first piece that I would like to introduce, and you need to help me out here with how to pronounce it. It's a piece you wrote in 2015 called Illumina Arabidopsis thaliana. Did I say that right?
That's really close.
That's okay. I was close. I was close.
Yeah, it's Illumina Arabidopsis thaliana.
Uh-huh. Okay. Arabidopsis thaliana. Okay.
You could just say
First
Illumina.
of all, Illumina. Yeah, my first question is, what does that mean?
Light, or like, illuminate. So since
Yeah.
The rest of the title uses it's all in Latin.
Yeah.
But so I figured that since it deals specifically with the Arabidopsis leaf, since I was using Latin in the title anyway, why not just go all the way? So I added the imperative of illuminate, and there you go.
You mentioned leaf. It has to. The inspiration has to do with science and biology. Yeah. What is this leaf, and how did that inspire this work for you?
Well, now the leaf itself, the Arabidopsis leaf, is not anything that's particularly noteworthy to anyone outside of biology and outside of genomic biology in particular. So what led me to this piece is actually a different collaborative effort between me and a genomic biologist back when I was at the University of Illinois. Her name was her name is Allele K. Grennan, and she go by Kat. And we were paired together for this event called The Sound of Science that the composers, the student body composers, and the genomic biologists got together and thought it would be a great idea because there's a lot of interest in people who pursue the scientific arts in the visual and musical arts. And a lot of people don't really think about this, I feel, when and it's easy enough for even people who are in academic fields like teaching music in a university setting like me to like really take for granted. But there is a lot of interest in the arts outside of people who practice it. And there were just a number of people in that particular department who wanted to collaborate with composers. So we put together this event. Each composer was paired with a genomic biologist, and luck of the draw had me pick Kat. And her experiment was working on producing genetic mutants, or just mutants in general, of an Arabidopsis leaf. So what she would do is that she would breed strains of the leaf that would have like a different kind of makeup with regard to chloroplasts. So she would either have like a leaf that would have more chloroplasts, a leaf that would have larger and fewer chloroplasts. And as I recall, there was one leaf that had like basically one humongous chloroplast. And the point is, and she was comparing all of her mutants with a wild type, like a natural leaf. And the point was that she was working on trying to optimize photosynthesis in plants with the end goal of being able to produce plants that would be able to take more advantage of sunlight and ideally grow in less hospitable conditions, so to help with agriculture. And why the Arabidopsis leaf is so special to genomic biologists, and granted, this is coming from somebody with no training in genomic biology. So if anybody listening to this thinks I'm completely off base, I apologize. But it's my understanding that the Arabidopsis leaf is particularly friendly with regards to genetic modification. So it's easier to test out certain things with that leaf than it is with other kinds of plants. So that's one of the reasons why it's so special in Alleel's project, and working with the data so let me take a step back. So at a certain point, when she had finished a particular phase of her research, she presented me with basically just a bunch of raw data. And so I was trying to sift through it and try to come up with like meaningful connections between the data and music, and how I could represent it musically without it being just a soulless sonification of data. And I also didn't want to take so many liberties that the data is lost completely. So from that data, I was able to engage in sound design. So the rate of photosynthesis in the leaf was informed the shapes of the sounds, like the synthesized sounds specifically. So it would inform the number of harmonics with regard to like the makeup of the sound. It would inform the shape of each of those harmonics to give it its articulation, some kind of a sustain and then a decay. And it would also inform like frequency content too. I also thought I could go a few steps further. So I had sometimes I would have the data actually in certain segments of the piece, I would have it inform the spatialization. So where the sounds are at any given point in time would be determined by what was going on in the leaf. And there are two moments in the piece in particular where you might be able to hear it, where it sounds like you have like little photons of light just like pinging off like some sort of surface. Of course, it's harder to hear the surround effect in stereo. And by the way, this piece is meant for an 8-channel surround sound setup. But the idea is that the photons would kind of converge on this like central area and would like hit that central area, and then part of the energy of that so-called photon would be absorbed by this hypothetical object, and then it would like what was left would be passed through. So it's like basically waste material, and part of it would be reflected back. And I would try to like account for Doppler shifts and things like that. And I'm also thinking like, well, if something loses energy when it's being transmitted, then it should also like, there should be more aspects of the sound that would imply that velocity itself has lessened. So I took all of that into account. I could go on and on about what I did with the data, but there is another section in particular where it was about 6 minutes in, dealing with the movement of the chloroplasts through the leaf of like the wild type and then the mutants. And it was only a minute worth of audio, but it's still probably my favorite part of the piece, simply because it took me over a month to compose.
Wow.
Over a month to program, because I had to, it took actually like almost 20,000 lines of code to be able to encode everything properly.
Jesus.
And I still remember I was like part of my time at the Seamus National Conference in 2015 was me just in my hotel room coding, trying to get it done on time. So it's yeah. So I know I've been talking a great deal about how I wrote the piece, but I guess just something to take away is that really, except for the occasional sampled found sound, like I did a pizza pan, and like I also sampled, I like a wind chime that a coworker gave me back when I was living in Japan, and I sampled that. But most of the sounds are actually synthesized and were derived from the data itself.
So you mostly made it through computer programming and coding language. And so, yeah, synthesized sound. All right. Yeah, that was what I was wondering when I was listening to it. Like, how are these sounds being made, and where is it? Where are you getting them from? Was it all completely through electronics, laptops, like computers, things that I don't know too much about?
Well, don't worry, because listening back to that piece, there are sounds that I don't think I could actually replicate very easily again. I mean, that was part of the magic of her data, is that it led me to do things with sound that I probably would never have done anyway. So
I see.
yeah, and so I'd have to go back. In fact, I'd have to find her data again to even see. But yeah, it was. And actually, there one more sound that I sampled that I feel compelled to share, because it does have significance, especially for Kat herself, because she was insistent that I sampled sounds from the electron microscope that she would use. And while a lot of the sounds of the microscope really couldn't be captured very well, at least not with the equipment that I had, something that was able to be captured very well was the beeping of the buttons. So every now and then you might hear a button beeping, and that came directly from the microscope from the laboratory where everything happened.
So you recorded live this beeping from the microscope and then incorporated it into the piece.
Yep, as she was working. So.
Oh, wow. All right. There are no instruments or anything like that involved.
No sampled instruments in this piece.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, to me, it sounded a bit like something you might hear in like a sci-fi movie or something. Just all these kind of in a maybe a very mechanical world of like industrialized world, perhaps in the future. That's just what I imagined when I was listening to this.
Well, that makes me very happy, because that was the very kind of affect I was shooting for.
Well, definitely achieved it.
Thank you. And and so far this piece can be found if anyone's interested in listening to it. It's available on the Music from Seamus Volume 26 anthology. It's like the pieces from the 2016 National Conference that people liked. So
nice.
Yeah.
I would bring up Virgo 3C273, which is a piece that we worked on together, and in
Mm-hmm.
2020, right before the start of the pandemic. Um, well, I was the cellist for this, so I can speak from that point of view. But as a composer, what was your first of all, yeah, how did you decide on this topic for a piece for solo cello and live electronics?
So why did I decide on? You mean like why did I choose an astronomically themed topic?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think I've I've been really fascinated with astronomy since my undergraduate days when I took it as basically like I had to take a science credit still, and so I chose astronomy, and yeah, and there's certain astronomical, like for me, well, I should also say this. Another thing that really primed my interest in just the outer space and the universe at large is when I lived in Japan. I didn't live in a city. I didn't live in Tokyo or Kyoto, Kobe. I didn't even live in a town. I lived in a village. I lived in a tiny
Mm-hmm.
little mountain village where there just was no air pollution. There was no light pollution. In fact, it was high
Jeez.
enough in the mountains that the Japanese government put an astronomical observatory in my village.
Oh, okay.
So because it's just so easy to get just amazing views, and just walking outside of my house on a cloudless night at like 6 p.m. and looking up and just seeing like sights that I didn't think was possible outside of a planetarium. Like I would see, like it wasn't just stars. Like I would see like clouds of like purple and like nebulas and things, and I just it's like that is the sky that that most of humanity admired, like for all of history and prehistory. It's really only been recently when we just have street lights everywhere and lit buildings in our concrete jungles that it's just become invisible to us. But seeing it just was like really kind of it was a truly spiritually deep experience. And so because of that, I've liked to from time to time touch upon certain astronomical phenomena that I find particularly interesting. And one that has struck me as really quite fascinating is this is the quasi-stellar object, or the quasar, which is not a star, but it seems like a star from our vantage point. But these are like just like massive, incredibly like massive astronomical entities that just burn way brighter than our sun burns, and they're really quite filled with like devastating energy. But from afar, from the safety of Earth, they're actually quite beautiful to behold. And I just thought that it was just something that I felt I wanted to capture in a piece. And since I was working with you on a piece for cello and electronics, I thought that would be a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah. Um, is there something about the cello that evokes that idea and connection to maybe nature, astronomy?
Yeah, I think so. I think well, the cello itself is just, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, but it's particularly timbrally rich. And there's just something about the cello in particularly well, in a few registers, one being kind of the around the second octave of the cello, when it gets a little wolfy. um like I feel like it has, even though it's not considered a particularly strong part of the cello range with regard to like expressive potential. I think it does express a certain kind of melancholy very well. And
Yeah.
likewise, I feel like just an octave above it, uh, can convey a sense of longing. Above that, like you know, it could be terror, it could be just heightened anxiety, it could be ecstasy. Um, and a lot of these emotions I ascribe to the quasar, something that is really just it's this incredibly volatile mass. It can be very destructive, but from afar it's beautiful, but it's also kind of lonely. We can see it from so far away because of how incredibly massive and hot and brightly it burns. But I to me it's a kind of sad beauty that I think the cello can evoke very well.
Yeah, definitely. The cello has this, I think, sorrowful, longing quality to it. And how about the electronics part of it? Did you write the cello portion first and then added on the electronics part afterwards, or was it a parallel process?
Well, the electronics component of this piece actually has a very interesting history, because you may recall that the initial vision for the recital in which it played was quite different. And so I was thinking for a long time, I was writing for a different program, one that
Uh-huh.
might, you know, celebrate more like music that draws upon more popular idioms. And so
Right.
originally this was going to be a piece that would harken back to a very brief period in my musical life where I had aspirations to become a psychedelic trance DJ. And I
Oh,
was originally going to
yes.
be incorporating, which is why like I made some drastic changes to even the cello part toward the end, because
Right.
it was going to sound, well, there were parts that actually were the same. Like the cadenza was always going to be the way it was. The interior section with the pizzicato, that really didn't change. But like what you might consider like the A and the A prime was very different than what I had intended. And so when I discovered that I was going to be sharing a concert with Crumb and Sariaho, I thought, yeah, it's got to be
Right.
a. And I'm glad though that it worked out this way, because I feel like compared to the original drafts and what I was initially doing with electronics, I think this became a much stronger piece. Like I would go back
Yeah.
through like my old manuscripts of the first version and just kind of
Uh-huh.
cringe. It wasn't. You know, I think I hinted enough at my, maybe not so much psychedelic trance in the last version, but still in my interest in more popular trends in music, at least as of the early 2000s, in the final version. And and I think it actually works out even much better in depicting how I feel a quasar should be depicted, without relying on like a techno backbeat or anything.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to the psychedelic trance part because I'm very interested in that. But yeah, for the listeners, this performance kind of was a race to the end, and oh gosh, I don't know how we pulled that off, but yeah, it also went through a lot of different reconfigurations from the initial concept of more of a, exactly what you said, a poppy sort of with many popular elements. We also thought about putting a Shostakovich cello concerto on the program and reworking that, plus your original composition. And then that changed, and we had Sariaho's Se Papillon on there, which is just pure solo cello, um, no electronics, and also with George Crumb's Voy Balanea with flute and piano, prepared piano, with all these effects and mics, but there was also no electronics in that, just a lot of extended techniques. And then yeah, so it went through a lot of let's say transformations, and until the last moment we were really scrambling. But yeah, it was a very memorable recital from my
It
end.
was. It for me too. It was very touch and go, and there were times
Very.
just days before the recital
Yes.
where I was really wondering, like, are we going to make it? And we got to the. I
Yeah.
still remember we got to the point where we were able, because we only had half an hour before,
Yeah.
like, from when the person who had the concert hall before us left, like they cleaned up, and
Right.
we had to set up all the electronics too and the
Yes.
preparations for the crumb. We got that to the point where you were able to start playing within half an hour.
Oh
That's
my gosh. Yeah.
to
It was
I
really.
still don't. I still don't understand how we were able to do that. I mean, it's like that's like
Oh
that's like an hour and a half worth of setup, in my opinion. But we got it. It was
yeah.
just like down to a
I
science,
don't
and
know. That was
yeah.
I mean, normally for a performance you would be worried about the playing, but I was completely not worried about the playing. I was just
Mhm.
hoping like no cables start to go off and no the technical setup would go smoothly and nothing start to defunction and
Oh
ooh,
yeah, I remember there were
yeah,
issues with like sometimes we get a good mixer, and then sometimes we get the bad
yeah.
mixer that wouldn't send
Yeah.
sound, and it was just luck of the
All
draw
this
which one we would
mess.
get on any given
Yeah.
day.
The crazy cables. I remember like the audience was already walking in and we were still fixing the cables like on stage. Wow. Yeah, that
Yep.
was it was just there was a lot of electricity in the room. For sure.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. But it went off without a hitch actually, somehow.
Hmm.
It's a miracle. Yeah. And back to the psychedelic trance DJ thing. Yeah, you were at some point considering a career in DJing.
Very briefly.
Wow.
But yeah, I it was back also in my Japan days, and the interest stemmed from actually a friend of mine who was getting into the practice. He and I were friends from Florida State University back in when we were getting our bachelor's degrees, and we both were accepted on the JET program to go over to Japan and teach English. He was placed in a city, Kakogawa, in the Kansai region, and I was placed like way far away. But I would still go and visit him from time to time, and yeah, like he got me into listening to Infected Mushroom, which I really quite admire, especially some of the
Infected
early work.
mushroom.
Yeah.
Is that a DJ or
Yeah, it's an Israeli psytrance duo. So
oh
yeah,
dang.
they both DJ. They both produce the music, um and also I got into some work by like Japanese based artists like Sakakibara Taku, and yeah, I something just clicked with me. Whereas like other kinds of electronic dance music, I would enjoy or listen to, but on an intellectual level, it just wasn't as stimulating. Like listening to the classical mushroom album, and hearing like some like fugato, like some like some counterpoint in trance. Like it's just something that I didn't usually associate with the genre. So like we would go to like stores in Osaka and Kobe and just play, just like mess around with analog synths and digital synths too, and probably really annoyed the shopkeepers. But yeah, I thought like that kind of music would be music I'd be really interested in pursuing, and I probably would have if I
Uh-huh.
hadn't left Japan the very next year and returned to the States, and then decided that I actually truly wanted to get back into pursuing a career in, well, at the time, acoustic like contemporary classical composition. So
did you play with like the records, like how we envision sort of the stereotypical DJ idea?
yeah, sampling from I never got to that point. I actually would just produce original compositions just using analog synths and some samples I would just generate myself. But no, I never actually like DJ'd using samples of others' music, though it's still, I mean, it's a very common practice and something that I wanted to do. But again, like I said, it was just very brief, but it was something I was really, really interested in for a few months. And it's still like, and I'll say this, before I started work on Virgo, back when it was still going to have more psytrance elements, I got back in touch with my friend who's now a software engineer in Colorado. And he hasn't anymore now that he's married, now he has a kid, and I don't think he DJs anymore, but for like over a decade he DJ'd as Pointy DaiAne in Japan and the US. And I just asked him, and I'm not going to dox him, so I'll use his stage name, but I said, Pointy, just I've been kind of out of the loop with psytrance for the past decade or so. Do you have a listening list? And so he actually supplied me with like 8 hours of psytrance, and so I just keep listening to that as for inspiration for Virgo 3C273.
Oh,
it was
damn,
it was
so you really got like into the zone of it. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, just throwing it out there, but maybe one day there could be a different version, like a second version of Virgo, where it does incorporate these psychedelic trance music elements, and that would be really cool, like a second phase for the Quasar star or something like this.
Oh, I love the way you put it. A second phase for the Quasar. Actually after the concert, like literally an hour or so, like on the way to our after party, I was thinking of that very thing. Like I wanted to just use like samples of your playing, but to make like a psytrance version, and it wouldn't be because I didn't want to have like a compromise. Like I still didn't like the quasi psytrance version that I was going to write. I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But having like a version that's legitimately like that, like fits into the psytrance genre, I just thought would be really cool. That's something that it may be forthcoming in the near future.
Totally. Like really get, like, it can go into another world altogether of like really going deep in there, but taking another life of its own, like a second life of the same
second
beast.
life. Yeah.
And another piece that you wrote in also in the same year in 2020 with Virgo is formally unannounced,
Mm-hmm.
which some assembly required recorded
Mm-hmm.
for horn, trombone, and piano. Um, yeah, for me, this piece was reminded me a lot of brass bands and big band.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, really?
was there some of that? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I wasn't going for the big band approach, but maybe it has to
Okay.
do with some of the quartal harmonies in there. I could see that
Yeah.
being reminiscent of brass bands for sure.
Hmm.
Um, no, actually, this piece also had well, I mean, I guess I'm starting to repeat myself. Keep saying it has an interesting genesis, which of my pieces doesn't have an interesting genesis, but so yeah, this piece was commissioned from me by this ensemble who wanted to well, they were looking for Florida composers to commission specifically. They yeah, and when I had mentioned that predominantly I write for instrument and electronics now, that they were immediately latched on to this possibility of incorporating electronics into their concerts. And so yeah, I wrote the piece, and around that same time, I actually, in fact, it wasn't long after my first trip to Switzerland, where I came down with probably the nastiest case of influenza I've ever suffered from,
Oh wow.
where like I had like fevers that exceeded like 40 degrees Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit, and it actually ended up causing issues with my eyesight, long-term issues that I'm still struggling with today.
Oh
Not as much
Jesus.
as I had been before. Like there were months where I could barely see. Like just like opening my eyes was and trying to look at things was an exercise in futility, because I would just consistently see double or quadruple, um, and through enough training I've been able to fix that for the most part, but it still takes a little more effort than I would like. um, but yeah, it was a really unexpected, unannounced intrusion of something in my life that ended up fundamentally just changing the way I lived, especially for a few months. So then I got the commission and I got much better again. And but I thought I wanted to write a piece. Well, actually, I started writing the piece without it in mind, but as the piece took shape, I realized it just kind of seemed to parallel that part of my life, so I decided to kind of run with it. And yeah, so I wrote a piece that begins very conventionally, and it's a piece for, as you mentioned, piano, horn, trombone, and electronics. But the electronics really don't have much of a role to play in the piece, for like the first half of the piece. Like at the very beginning, they're not there at all, and then the piano's kind of by itself in the B section of. And by the way, I did structure it intentionally as a kind of a rondo, and in the B section then they finally appear, and then it's like overpowered again, the return of the refrain and the A. And it kind of proceeds as a rondo would, with the occasional aberration from the electronics, until after the interior C section we go back to the refrain. The refrain begins as one might expect, and then there's the sudden like glitch in the system where suddenly the electronics just burst forth. The players don't know what to do. In fact, I even in the score I notate that I want them to just improvise chaotically for 25 seconds, and then we get to the just electronics alone, and then it glitches out, and then suddenly the instrumentalists find themselves in a brand new soundscape. And like every now and then the horn, like, well, the hornist begins by just like testing the waters with some just occasional like F sharps, and the electronics would respond. So it's kind of a call and response between the brass and the electronics. And then sometimes the electronics would lash out and along, and that would be enhanced by like the pianist glissandoing at the lowest octave of the piano. And so it's just like the electronics are now kind of a dominating presence. And by the end, both the living like human players and the electronics find a kind of equilibrium. By that point, the rondo really now technically the rondo is complete. Just the final iterations of B and the final refrain are just very heavily transformed. But I kind of consider it a failed rondo of sorts because it doesn't really go back to the beginning. Doesn't feel like a round dance. It's like the rondo hits a brick wall, and now things aren't going to be the same, and everybody's just going to have to deal with this new variable that's intruded on their lives, and so hence the title, formally unannounced.
So it's almost like the players versus the electronics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Like the live beings versus the artificial beings.
Mm-hmm. And the live beings just resign themselves to the fact that they're going to be accompanied by this artificial construct, this aberration going forward, which is why the ending is kind of resigned and subdued. It ends actually harmonically. It's a half step lower than how it began, like the piece begins. And but I also make sure like the electronics and the performers by the end actually seem to blend better. It's like then they really become more of a cohesive whole, even if neither are particularly happy about
it. So they find some kind of compromise among themselves.
Yeah.
Tale of the man versus the machine.
That's right.
Yeah. And how about now? I know you have Chime Festival coming up, and of course
Mm-hmm.
also Camp, which is happening in March in Florida. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what else are you? What are you working on now? And what are you expecting in the next while?
Well, the projects that I'm working on now that I'm pretty much in both instances am in the part creation phase. So like I've just finished the two pieces. Are well, one is the fifth piece in my Entropic Atelier series for Chaos Flute V, as I had mentioned before. And the other piece is actually a piece that was commissioned by the McCormick duo, which is made up of Unmiko, who is the president and one of the co-founders of Camp, and the legendary percussionist Bob McCormick. The piece I'm writing for them is entitled Chronometric Echoes in Liminal Spaces. It's a piece that utilizes this idea of the liminal space, which when I first came to know about this phenomenon, which seemed to crop up quite a bit during the pandemic. I don't really remember hearing about it in the past, but the phenomenon itself is something I've experienced several times, where you have this physical space, this location that is typically a place that you would expect there to be human habitation, like a classroom or a cafeteria, a playground. That's usually in a building, sometimes outside of a building. And it's often at night and it's completely deserted. And oftentimes like these like images, like photography that captures this idea of liminal space will specifically exclude like exits, like doors or even windows. Like you'll see hallways that are just dimly lit and there's the feeling of no exit, so you feel like it's almost like it's an uncanny representation of reality. It's like it's a place that should have humanity or human life, but it's devoid of it. um in fact, as I'm talking now, it makes sense why it would become popular during the pandemic, because
Yeah,
we had many of those places that were quite literally just
true.
abandoned, that these are these buildings
Yes.
that expected to accommodate human life and didn't, and they become really kind of freaky. In fact, some people are really sensitive and to such kinds of spaces, and they feel like a sense of anxiety or overwhelming dread when they look at them, or if they're in these spaces and they um so yeah, I became fascinated by the phenomenon and decided to explore that in music. So in my piece, I have Unmi is going to be utilizing actually solely inside the piano techniques. So, and I'm going to be using like ebows and things to kind of generate a sinusoidal, like pure but still empty kind of a timbre.
Hmm.
Um, she's also going to be, along with strumming things and picking at the strings using the ebow. She's going to be playing a keyboard recorder, which she's played like for the camp concert, and she can really elicit this sense of pure terror from that instrument. It's fantastic.
Wow.
Um, and then I'll have Bob with percussion. I playing a lot on like crotales, vibraphone, doing a lot of bowed vibraphone to like
Yeah.
complement the ebow use. um I'm having both performers use a lot of super ball mallets, because you can really like especially on drums or even in the piano, you can get a lot of uncanny, like unheimlich sounds from using a
Hmm.
super ball mallet. And then and there's going to be electronics too, but this time the electronics aren't going to be reproduced through speakers. They're going to be reproduced well, it will be through speakers. I mean, you have to use some kind of a transducer, but instead of loudspeakers, they're going to be fed through these small transducers that I'm going to be attaching to like discarded crates and cardboard boxes, things that people would typically like cast aside or like litter, like waste that you might
Hmm.
see in these liminal spaces. And so the process sound of the performers will be emanating from these objects on the stage. Also going to have fluorescent lighting, as fluorescent lighting is a major component to liminal spaces. And finally, the whole stage, the whole auditorium will be dark, but you'll have like a fluorescent light on stage. But both performers and their instruments are going to be completely obfuscated by a projection screen. So they'll be behind the screen because the idea is you don't want to see any
Oh, wow.
humans.
I see.
And what's going to be projected on the projection screen, and in fact, I want to, if I don't know if I can make this happen, but if I can record it onto like 9mm film or something, I could use like an old projector, and the noise from the old film projectors, like the clicking and things, like I feel would really
Yeah.
lend much to the atmosphere. But if not, I'll just use a digital projector. That's fine. But I want to project liminal spaces, and I'll in fact soon I'm going to be going around the University of Chicago at night, because you can get some really gothic and kind of creepy liminal space potential in the buildings here for sure. And then I'm just going to project those as the piece progresses. So that's been, in fact, I started that piece last year. It's just been, with all of the resources that are going into the piece, it's just taking a long time to finally bring together. But I'm finally at that stage where everything's coming together in time,
Yeah.
so it can be performed.
Will you see the because you mentioned that the performers will be behind screens, but
Mhm.
will you see like shadows and outlines of the performers or
I'm
not at
hoping
all?
not. I'm hoping that
Okay.
it's going to be acousmatic in a way that their role in this is going to be completely obfuscated, but we'll know they're
Hmm.
there, and that I'm hoping
Right.
will add to the feeling of dread.
Yeah. Yeah. And the moment you mentioned deserted hallways, and I just immediately connected to like Japanese horror films. Um, I mean, those are frightening. But
Yes, they
sounds like a
are.
very, yeah, impactful piece. I'm sure it will be making a
Thank you.
statement. Yeah, and this will be in camp in March.
This will not be premiered at Campground.
Ah,
This is still going to
oh
be
no.
in the future. We haven't decided on a specific premiere date, but it'll probably be with one of the other pieces that they've premiered. Yeah, this is all part of this commissioning project they had, or they're going, that's ongoing, and ultimately all of their commissioned pieces will land on an album that they're going to be recording. But
Oh,
they
great.
also premiere like in person all of the pieces, so it'll probably be premiered for logistical reasons in Florida, but I'm hoping to get it to make it portable enough to take it on the road as well.
Yeah, certainly. Exciting. Well,
Yeah.
Ben, we've come to the end. Thanks for coming on today and talk to us about your works and your inspirations and how you go about creating your compositions electroacoustically or acoustically. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me as well.